So we can start.
Perfecto. ¿Se me escucha bien?
Just a second, please, Belén, while we need to start the webinar.
Perfecto. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Un momento,
Mi
por favor.
nombre es Belén
Sí.
Arcucci, soy la creadora del programa de derechos de las personas con discapacidad de la Asociación Civil por la Igualdad y la Justicia, una organización argentina que integra la red regional de educación inclusiva de Latinoamérica. En primer lugar, quiero darle la bienvenida, agradecerles por el interés en participar en este encuentro que organizamos junto con la Campaña Mundial por la Educación y la Campaña Latinoamericana por el Derecho a la Educación. Les quiero recordar que tienen disponible la interpretación en diferentes idiomas en el botón de abajo a la derecha y pueden elegir en qué idioma quieran escuchar la interpretación. Les recuerdo que este evento tiene como objetivo central exponer diversas experiencias de todo el mundo que trabajan por la transformación de los sistemas educativos y también de las culturas escolares en el sentido indicado por los instrumentos internacionales de derechos humanos. Especialmente el artículo número 24 de la Convención de Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad, que establece claramente que los estados tienen la obligación de garantizar sistemas educativos inclusivos en todos los niveles, con los apoyos y los ajustes razonables necesarios, y evitar que las personas con discapacidad sean excluidas de la educación regular. Bajo este paradigma, desde hace muchos años se han producido avances y aprendizajes que es necesario resaltar para echar luz sobre este cambio que es posible. Y esta es la finalidad de este encuentro. Por eso, a continuación, en primer lugar, le voy a dar la palabra a Madeleine Zúñiga, vicepresidenta de la Campaña Mundial por la Educación, que va a dirigir unas palabras para abrir este encuentro. Muchas gracias, Madeleine.
No, muchas gracias a ti, Belén. Para mí es buenos días a todos y todas los que están presentes esta mañana y esta tarde acompañándonos en este evento de suma importancia para la campaña mundial por la educación. La campaña está comprometida con la Agenda de Desarrollo Sostenible al 2030 y en ella se plantea un reto inherente al ejercicio de los derechos humanos y su carácter universal, pues declara como principio de su implementación no dejar a nadie atrás. Así, el ODS 4 dedicado a educación demanda cumplir con el principio de inclusión junto a los principios de equidad, calidad y aprendizaje a lo largo de la vida. El principio de inclusión implica el derecho de toda persona a lo largo de su vida a tener la oportunidad de aprender en cualquier modalidad del sistema educativo que rija en sus países. No solo se trata de la educación de niñas, niños y adolescentes en la educación inicial, primaria o secundaria, sino también del derecho de las personas jóvenes, adultas y adultas mayores, cualquiera sea su condición social, económica, su pertenencia a un grupo étnico y lingüístico, su orientación sexual, su identidad de género o condición de discapacidad. El reto es inmenso, difícil, pero es posible enfrentarlo y vencerlo. En este evento focalizamos la atención en el desafío específico de la inclusión de las personas con discapacidad en los sistemas educativos, considerando la diversidad de la naturaleza de sus posibles discapacidades. Partimos por recordar, como lo ha hecho Belén hace un momento, que existen normas internacionales y nacionales orientadas a cumplir con el principio de inclusión, tal como la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad, aprobada ya hace 15 años. Ya ella leyó el artículo 24 y es importante decir que después, dada la dificultad para implementar, para desarrollar esta convención, se han emitido varias observaciones generales. Toda esta normatividad internacional ha sido la base para que muchos países elaboren también sus propias políticas de inclusión educativa para las personas con discapacidad. Esto implica que hay que tener medidas que permitan el registro de todo el universo de personas con discapacidad, sea esta física, sensorial, psicosocial o intelectual, y así garantizar su acceso a la educación. También es preciso medidas para el adecuado acceso a las instalaciones donde estudian. También para elaborar textos, materiales pedagógicos y todo otro recurso pertinente a las diferentes discapacidades. Eso es muy importante resaltar. También es necesario contar con docentes preparados para responder a las necesidades específicas de los estudiantes con discapacidad en cualquier nivel o modalidad educativa. Es también imperativo diseñar estrategias de enseñanza y de evaluación adecuadas a la diversidad de discapacidades, a las necesidades e intereses de los estudiantes. Imprescindible hablar del presupuesto suficiente que garantice las condiciones óptimas o por lo menos mínimas para ofrecer la educación de calidad a las personas con discapacidad. La educación inclusiva para estas personas es desafiante, un reto grande para cualquier país, pero es necesario asumirla, planificarla, involucrar a las familias y a las comunidades, presupuestarla y desarrollarla hasta hacerla realidad. Las experiencias que escucharemos hoy en día en este evento son muestras de avances en legislación y prácticas de inclusión en la educación de las personas con discapacidad. Países y organizaciones de sociedad civil que han asumido el desafío y están haciendo posible una educación de calidad a lo largo de la vida al valioso universo de las personas con discapacidad. Toda sociedad que se declare democrática, equitativa, justa, debe aspirar a ser inclusiva. Dice mucho de una sociedad ver cómo trata, cómo considera a las personas con discapacidad en cualquier momento de su vida en cuanto al ejercicio de sus derechos. El derecho a la vida, a la salud, a la educación, al trabajo decente y bien remunerado, a la participación en la vida pública y política de su país, en suma, a una vida digna. Avancemos juntos hasta lograr ese fin último. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Madeleine, por tan interesante introducción. A continuación, quiero presentar a nuestro primer expositor, Gordon Porter, director de Educación Inclusiva Canadá, que nos hablará sobre su experiencia en la transición a un sistema educativo inclusivo en los últimos 35 años. Muchas gracias, Gordon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this event. Thanks to the organizers and to those of you in attendance. I'm pleased to be able to share some of my thoughts about inclusive education with you today. First, an inclusive school is a community school. Serves all the children who would naturally attend, siblings, peers, kids across the street, with or without special needs or disabilities. Developing inclusive schools involves many factors. It requires legislation and policy. It requires advocates to promote inclusion. And critically important, it requires school and classroom educators to put in place the day-to-day practices that make inclusion a reality. Here in Canada, the Charter of Rights, which was implemented in 1982, was a factor in making inclusion happen. The Charter requires equality for every citizen, including those with disabilities. The 1980s saw the development of a vision for inclusion that came from families as well as from professionals, including teachers. Together, many spoke up for inclusion. They sought out effective models from which they could learn. In that period, there were few systemic models, but there were a few schools and school districts in Canada that served as guides. Since those days, we've made progress in developing a culture of inclusion in our schools, but the process is far from complete. Many parts of Canada have inclusive schools, but far too many do not. In cities with larger populations and higher levels of wealth, we have had schools continue to use segregated classes, and in some cases, segregated schools. These areas have not kept up with other parts of the country. They have entrenched special education programs with many parents and teachers who are resistant and indeed fearful of change. So what I can say is that in Canada, making schools inclusive is not a matter of funding or money. Having money is not the issue. How it is used is the issue. Let me talk about the challenge of inclusion. There are ongoing challenges for all the stakeholders involved, and let me share a few thoughts about several of them. First, the challenge for parents. The challenge for parents as schooling changes from traditional, that is traditional special education, to an inclusive system is great. If all they have experienced is the special school or classroom and uninviting regular schools, they are wise to look for evidence that their child will be served well and in an inclusive setting. The fact is, parents may never have encountered a community school that was welcoming to their child with a disability. The transition to inclusion must be handled with care, and parents need to have their concerns addressed so they can develop confidence in the regular school to do the job. I think parents have a right to expect more than minimal compliance with the new approach as well. Teachers and school leaders need to make sure there is robust support for inclusion. Now, turning to the challenge to school leaders. School leaders play a crucial role in providing a sense of direction to the school or school system. They need to develop effective supports for students and teachers to see that the challenges are met. They need to have a clear vision and a steady hand to ensure that the school welcomes all children. School leaders don't have to have all the answers to all the questions that arise, but they do need to be able to bring people together to solve problems as best they can and draw on others to help out when needed. Leaders need to focus on engaging with the community and the families the school serves. Now, a few thoughts about teachers. Effective inclusion depends on the commitment, knowledge, and skill of classroom teachers. While the competence of teachers may vary, it's reasonable to expect that teachers are generally well-trained and have a wide range of instructional strategies in their personal toolbox. However, inclusion can require new pedagogical skills, particularly in ways to accommodate teaching to individual needs and ensuring that all students are participating in the activities of the classroom. We need to build capacity among teachers and the support teachers who will work with them on a daily basis in the classroom. Every teacher needs a basic orientation on what inclusive schooling will mean to them and reassurance that effective support will be provided as it's needed. There are those who suggest that we need to get every teacher trained and then we can start inclusion. That has not been my experience. I found it was important to follow initial orientation with practical experience. Teachers learn more and they learn faster when they're dealing with inclusion with an actual student. I do advise care and consideration of initial efforts in a school. Teachers with a particularly positive attitude and skill set make the best pioneers, and they need to be well supported as they encounter challenges in the process. In Canada, there continues to be a discussion about whether inclusion is a good idea. And the discussion about inclusive education, even after 30 years going down this path, continues. However, I think it's fair to say that the discussion today is focused on how to make inclusion work better, not on whether we should have it or not. There are always challenges and new obstacles that arise. There are always different views about what is required to make it work well. Questions about the number of teachers, the number of educational assistants, teacher training and how you continue training, and more. These are factors always open to debate. But I can confidently tell you that while inclusion is still a challenge and the path is sometimes rocky, our teachers and families overwhelmingly support it. Now turning to the question of global development of inclusion and what my thoughts are about those just starting down the path to implementing inclusive education. Every country is distinct, and in my experience is important not to give advice, but to share experiences and try to answer questions that might arise. Let me share a few things I've learned about transforming schools to be inclusive. First, it's important to do some research and satisfy political and opinion leaders that inclusion is not only an essential element in a vision for society and our schools in the 21st century, but it is in fact an effective way to organize schools for better learning for all. A colleague and I purposely titled a report we wrote on inclusion several years ago as Strengthening Inclusion, Strengthening Schools. Let me say that again. Strengthening inclusion, strengthening schools. Our assertion in that title was that the very effort to support teachers and schools to be inclusive will, in fact, help make it a better school for all the children with diverse needs who attend. I won't try to summarize all the research about inclusion here, but the evidence is clear that the greater the degree of heterogeneity, of diversity in the school system, the better the overall results for the community. Learning is not a zero-sum affair, and student achievement does not have to be affected by inclusive practices. But for this, you need leadership. Leadership in the Ministry of Education, in the local education authority, and in the school itself. A successful transition to inclusion will require the development of leadership at all levels. Let's conclude by considering how inclusion can have an effect on the community or society as a whole. My experience is that inclusive schooling has a clear influence on attitudes towards diversity and inclusion in the community at large. In my province in Canada, we now have citizens in their 40s who experienced inclusion in school in their childhood. Our students today know nothing different. They go to school and may have a peer in their class with an intellectual disability one year, several years later, another student with a visual impairment. Diversity in the community is mirrored by diversity in the school. Students go to the schools they would go to naturally if they did not have a special need. They are in age-appropriate classes, and they all learn in a common learning environment. I think it's important to say that based on my experience and the experience I've had with others here, the development of inclusive schools is never complete. The process continues. But inclusion in schools makes a difference. On a personal level, I can see it in the attitudes of the children in my family. Inclusion is a value we can all cherish and work to make a reality in the future. Inclusion in school is a powerful tool to achieve inclusion in society as a whole. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Gordon, por expresar tu gran experiencia en Canadá. Sin duda es muy interesante. Les recuerdo que si alguno tiene alguna pregunta, la puede dejar en el chat, que al finalizar las exposiciones vamos a tener un espacio para realizar preguntas. A continuación, voy a invitar a Kim An y a Lynn, que expondrán sobre su trabajo en la Asociación Vietnamita de una Educación para Todos. Muchas gracias.
Hello, everyone. Link, my colleague, and myself we will join in these presentations. So I give the floor to Link to introduce himself first.
Hello, everyone. I am very happy to see you all here today in this event, and this is my honor to join this event. My name is Linh. This is my sign name, and I am the member of steering board of Vietnam Association of Education for All, and I'm also the deaf teacher and principal of that school in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, the voice you are hearing is the voice of my sign language interpreter, Hiến. And now I want Kim Anh to introduce herself.
I'm National Coordinator of the Vietnam Association for Education for All, a network of 50 civil society organizations working for education for all, especially for the right to education of marginalized groups in Vietnam. And Linh will start our presentation.
Firstly, I want to share with you the definition of inclusive education. Because sometimes I see some stakeholder, for example, the government, organization, school, family, and the community, sometimes we misunderstand and have our own definition, and it's not the same one. So it's important that we make it clear and ensure the meaning of the definition for everyone. Here now in Vietnam, I can see that it's many stakeholders when they have the policy or the law to apply the inclusive for education, it may raise some more difficult for learner with disability rather than create the inclusive environment. And it happened all the way long up to now. And I see many misunderstandings. And because of that, they lead to some mistake when decision making of the people from other stakeholders.
Yes, so from what Linh has shared, our message is in our advocacy work, we need to be very clear on what it means inclusion, inclusive educations, to avoid misunderstanding and misconduct in the implementations. We can share one experience from our work. in Vietnam when the government, Ministry of Education and the school try to make education more inclusion. And with deaf learner, with the specific group of deaf learner, these are what the government and the school try to do. First, they think that the deaf need to learn to read lips. So they really think that hearing aids and cochlear implant, which is the operations at the back of the head, to install an equipment to help with hearing will be the solutions. And Lingwook can share with us how it impacts on the deaf.
Oh, it's a controversial discussion. Before I have the experience as a deaf child and using hearing aids, and I have to learn speech and use other methods to fix my ears and learn to speak. But it's 9 years and it doesn't have any result to improve my speaking. So at that time, I can learn only little, very little from school with that method, with that spoken method that we have to live it and we have to imagine what the teacher says, but we don't use sign language at the school. And other my friends in the class have the same experience. And also for the cochlear implant, some of my friends, they have very little result, like good effect from that. So it's also cause some headaches and not improve the speaking skill or the hearing skill as well. And it's also affect the brain, the thinking system. So we don't really encourage that, and we don't really use that like the main method to study. Nowadays, it's still a controversial discussion from all over the world. And it's not the only and the first and the important thing to inclusion in to create the inclusive education environment.
Another things that the government and the school try to do is also to provide learning through sign language. But in reality, when we visit the school, actually the teachers have very little sign. So how can deaf learner can understand when the teacher is not fluent in the language? And sign language is the natural or the mother tongue of the deaf. So they could not learn through that kind of, we think it's sign language method, but it is not actually. And also Ministry of Government recently unified sign language in Vietnam. In Vietnam, we have about 3 different sign language in the North, Central, and the South. And the government thinks that unify, come up with one set of language by experts from the ministry will be supportive, will be good for the school and for deaf learner in education. But let's hear from Linh how it impacts the deaf.
It's not a small problem and it's not a small issue. When the work of the government they do, and when we see that the deaf community see that in the policy, we don't feel it connect and really necessary with the education for deaf people. We have our own sign language of each region of the country, and is our culture, and it belongs to the each community. And in the world, it's the same. So, for example, we don't have one. If we have only one sign language, sometimes the learner from each region cannot understand the full meaning of the lecture, or they cannot protect and help diversity language. For example, just as hearing people use spoken language in the big country, or people don't travel a lot, so in each region you use different words. People from the north, people from the south, maybe talk about one meaning, one word, but we use different terms. So it's just the same. And the things that we learn more language, it just enrich the culture and the language. It's not make it less understand. So for like you learn so many language at one time, you know, you speak English, you speak French, you speak Spanish. It just help you to improve and create more space that you can communicate. And sign language is just like it is the language that equal to other language. So we don't need to do that, but rather do other things to support the inclusive education for deaf learners.
And also, we want education to be inclusive for the deaf. But then when deaf go to school, there is no sign language interpretation service. And we have very few interpreters, sign language interpreters in Vietnam. We just have more than 10 sign language interpreters, and the deaf community in Vietnam is between 1.5 million to 2.5 million deaf. And Linh can share more about this.
Yeah, now I am attending the university program, and it's such a very difficult for me. I and my friend, two deaf learners, come to the university, but there is no sign language interpreter, and the teacher only can speak to students, and we don't know how to understand the lecture, and we need provide sign language interpreter, but they say that if you want that, you have to pay it yourself. And when we pay ourselves for interpreter, it's very expensive for all the process of studying. And sometimes the sign language, they may not familiar with every subject that we learn. So it's hard that they can translate and interpreting every words, every norms, and every knowledge of every subject. So it's really hard for us to study in deep of the knowledge of each subject. And I have a chance to visit a village in Vietnam where raise children with disability, and in there they have a class, and they include every children with disability, with different kind of disability, children, blind children, deaf children, children using wheelchair, and the teacher will speak the lesson, and not everyone understand. And I see a deaf girl there. She just drawing. She just painting on her paper because she doesn't understand the lesson. And I also have a chance to visit a school in Thailand, and it's just the same in Vietnam, that I see that there is no sign language interpreter, and they cannot integrate and also join the class activity. So to make sure that everyone
Lynn
include
y
in
Kim
the...
Ann, si pueden ir redondeando la presentación, por favor.
Sorry, wait. I need to switch to the interpretation channel. Timing, right? But we almost finished.
Perfecto, perfecto.
Yeah, so I think our message is we need to make sure that the voice of the person with disability will be heard. We'll make sure that we let them speak their issues and the solutions as well. Because if we keep assuming what is good for them and make decisions for them, I think it will be very easy to make mistakes. Things we always share with policymakers as well. So for my organizations, we apply a comprehensive method because we think each stakeholder have a very important role to play to make education more inclusive. So we advocate policymakers, the government, Ministry of Education. So we have advocate for sign language to be mentioned specifically in our revised education law recently, to ensure that deaf can learn through sign language, which is the mother tongue, their mother tongue. We also advocate the school, a teacher training university, to train more deaf teachers and also to use deaf teachers when they have deaf students in their school. We also raise awareness for the community, for parents especially, to ensure that they will create a communicative environment as early as possible when they have a deaf child. Just don't try to fix the deaf child and just wait until too late for them to develop their vocabulary and their communication skill and also their knowledge. And we also support different organizations and different community of the deaf so that they can develop their own community. So I think that's the end of our presentations. Thank you for the attention.
Muchísimas gracias, Kiman y Lynn, especialmente por compartir su experiencia personal. A continuación, le doy la palabra a Traore Chairú, que presentará el trabajo de la Coalición Nacional de Educación para Todos de Burkina Faso. Muchas gracias.
Merci. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis Taïrou Traoré de la Coalition nationale d'éducation
Traore, quizás si te quitas la cámara.
Oui. Oui, vous m'entendez? Ah, ok, d'accord. Ah, vous m'entendez maintenant? Voilà, en organisation de la société civile, notre rôle, effectivement, c'est de faire la veille citoyenne. Et dans ce cadre, nous avons participé à la mise en œuvre du projet régional de plaidoyer pour la mise en œuvre des politiques éducatives inclusives en Afrique de l'Ouest. Ce projet a été développé par ANCEFA, la Fédération ouest-africaine des personnes handicapées, Humanité et Inclusion, avec l'appui financier de la coopération norvégienne. Par ce projet à une éducation de la prise en compte de l'éducation inclusive dans le plan d'action et budget de l'éducation du ministère de l'Éducation au Burkina Faso. Alors, en termes de force, ce que nous avons noté, c'est que l'étude a fait ressortir que la question de la prise en compte de l'éducation inclusive est affirmée dans tous les documents de politique et de stratégie éducative. Je vais parler par là du plan secteur de l'éducation et de la formation, le programme de développement stratégique en situation d'urgence. Et mieux, une direction de l'éducation inclusive, de l'éducation des filles et du genre a été mise en place et qui a été appuyée par l'adoption de la stratégie nationale de développement de l'éducation inclusive suite à plusieurs plaidoyers, avec bien sûr, y compris ceux de la coalition nationale pour l'éducation pour tous de Burkina Faso. Alors, on note que des expériences de classe inclusive sont en train d'être conduites par l'État burkinabé et des structures privées dans certaines écoles publiques et privées du pays, bien sûr avec l'appui de certains partenaires techniques et financiers, dont entre autres l'UNICEF, Humanité et Inclusion, CDM Life for the World, Aide et Action, etc. Alors, des données sont aussi collectées, même si elles restent à parfaire, sur les élèves, les enfants, les élèves handicapés dans les différents ordres d'enseignement. Je parle du préscolaire, du primaire, du post-primaire, du secondaire et même universitaire. Alors, au total, sur 4 601 561 élèves, le nombre d'élèves handicapés s'élève à 60 724 soit 1,3% de l'effectif global. Alors, en dépit de la disponibilité de ces statistiques, le budget alloué à l'éducation reste très faiblement sensible à la prise en compte des besoins des élèves handicapés dans le système éducatif au Burkina Faso. Alors, sur un budget de plus de 500 milliards de francs CFA, seulement 138 850 000 francs CFA, soit 0,2%, sont destinés à la prise en compte des besoins spécifiques des élèves handicapés. Est transféré sous forme de subvention aux structures éducatives privées d'éducation inclusive, surtout pour l'alimentation des enfants handicapés. On relève aussi que les fournitures scolaires, c'est-à-dire les cahiers, les stylos à billes, les manuels tels que les livres de lecture, de calcul, de sciences, d'histoire, de géographie, en braille, par exemple, ne sont pas, c'est-à-dire qu'ils sont les enfants handicapés visuels ne sont pas pris en compte dans les technologies qui sont développées surtout dans les textes d'information et de la communication par certains handicap international. Allô? 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 Ah,
Creo que está teniendo problemas de conexión. Traoré. Traoré, ¿nos escuchas?
oui? Je vous entends, vous m'entendez?
Te escuchamos.
Ah, ok. Donc, je disais que beaucoup d'infrastructures scolaires, telles que les salles de classe et les latrines, leurs équipements sont inadaptés à la situation des enfants handicapés, c'est-à-dire qu'il manque de rampes d'accès pour les élèves handicapés moteurs, par exemple de mains courantes pour les handicapés visuels. Il y a aussi l'insuffisance de formation des enseignants, surtout en braille et en langage de signes pour la prise en des enfants handicapés. Alors, comment dans ces conditions pouvons-nous parvenir à une éducation transformatrice pour ces enfants? Donc, tous, par définition, est celle qui implique un enseignement et un apprentissage conçu pour motiver et émanciper les apprenants, faire en sorte qu'ils soient heureux et en bonne santé, afin qu'ils apprennent, prennent des décisions et des mesures éclairées au niveau individuel et communautaire. Nous devons nous rendre compte qu'il nous reste beaucoup à faire donc, pour atteindre cet objectif avec l'éducation des enfants handicapés. Alors, c'est dire donc en dépit des efforts fournis par l'État, les partenaires techniques et financiers, les organisations de la société civile et les privés, de nombreux défis restent encore à relever pour la réalisation de l'objectif de développement durable numéro 4 au Burkina Faso. Alors, d'où la nécessité pour nous, individuellement et collectivement, de mobiliser plus de ressources financières donc, en vue d'allouer un budget conséquent pour la prise en compte des besoins éducatifs et spécifiques des enfants handicapés, y compris les technologies de l'information et de la communication. Il s'agit également d'impliquer les organisations de la société civile dans la sensibilisation des communautés donc pour le respect du droit à l'éducation des enfants handicapés. Parce qu'on constate des enfants, bon nombre d'enfants handicapés, ce type d'enfants dans leur famille. Alors, en les à leur montrant que l'enfant handicapé effectivement a du
Traoré.
et voilà, merci bien, merci. J'en ai fini, merci.
Perfecto. Traoré, muchas gracias por compartir tu experiencia. Y a continuación vamos a presentar a la última experiencia del evento de hoy, a Alan Thomas y a Claudia Werneck, que compartirán su exposición para contarnos sobre la experiencia de Escuela de Gente. Muchas gracias.
Alan?
It's just we haven't been spotlighted yet. So just waiting for us to be showing up. Or should I just, hi, there's me, hello.
Perfecto,
yeah,
allí estás.
Yeah, thank you. Can you also place Claudia here, please? But meanwhile, I'll just get started. Thank you for inviting us and for this entire event. We're loving it. I'm overjoyed to be here. My name is Alan Thomas. I work at Escola de Gente as a projects and programs analyst. And Escola de Gente is a 20-year-old Brazilian NGO with the mission to transform public policies into inclusive public policies. I'm a 26-year-old man. I'm going to describe myself super briefly, with white skin, short black hair, and brown eyes. I'm wearing a purple shirt. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. Claudia, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Claudia Werneck. I'm a journalist, writer. I am founder of the Escola de Gente, a Brazilian NGO I founded. The founder. As there is no audio description, I will describe myself as well. Yes, I am 64. I am a woman, and I have gray hair. Today, I represent the Accessibility Promotion Agents project. School of project that we call APA, Trans Young Leaders with Disabilities in Inclusion and Accessibility. The project has been in 4 slums of Rio between 2011 and 2017. It has trained 252 agents, adults 1429, 35 of them with disabilities. After a 45-hour course of inclusion, accessibility, non-discrimination, and human rights, they became accessibility promotion agents. Every course uses multiple accessible communication resources, such as language, audio description, closed caption, sign language, materials in digital media, letter, among others. This certificate brings value to their work life. They become a accessibility consultants in government, companies, and NGOs. I realized that the translation to Portuguese, just a moment, the translation they are being done from English to Portuguese, not totally aligned to that's what I'm telling, but anyways, just a commentary. That's for us to talk about with the details that are important for us. It is why I'm talking slower to help. According to the UN, more than 80% of people with disabilities live the poverty line in developed countries, as Brazil. So we know there is a vicious relationship between poverty and disability that enforces a historical cycle of non-participation. Because people with disability do not have access to services, goods, and rights, they are kept at home. As a result, they are not noticed by the community as part of the exclusion. The isolation perpetuates itself. And as the cycle begins in childhood, young people with and without disabilities too early lose the ability to perceive that they are intrinsic parts of the one same generation. Intrinsic parts of the same generation. So, how to break this cycle of non-participation? How do young people with and without disabilities prove to themselves that they belong to the invisible generation? How to defend the new generations to rebuild the logic of the contemporary world that is so quick to discriminate and so slow to find inclusive solutions. Inclusive solutions in general. So, how can we help youth to expand their models of human representation, to reorganize themselves as citizens and workers? Would it be possible to design a methodology with such complex inputs? Yes, it did. In 2011, 10 years ago, Escola de Gente methodology. It's a simple, low-cost, innovative methodology that works extraordinarily well for 2 reasons. It establishes a channel of communication between people with and without disabilities and educates them from the perspective of an inclusive society, impacting their lives. How does the APA methodology work? Inspired and supported by what we call communicational dilemmas. I understand. Escola de Gente believes the most serious forms of discrimination take place in the process of communication because of the lack of resources, of accessibility. Or the antidote for this discrimination person should be more communication, but an accessible. The antidote, therefore, are you repeat? Escola de Gente believes that the most serious forms of discrimination take place in process of communication because of the lack of resources of accessibility. resources of accessibility. Therefore, the antidote for this discrimination also should be more communication, but an accessible one, accessible communication as a solution. So in 2011, we decided it was urgent to experience life as it should be, with all forms of communication interact in real time. It is why the APA project offers total accessibility every time. The goal is to provoke the youth to discover the obvious, that all kinds of communication are legitimately human and have the same value for society. That is the reason why in the APA project, the youth are directed to collectively find solutions to the communicational dilemma, create practical and original arrangements to solve them. Can you imagine how amazing it is to teach audio description to a class in which some are blind, some are deaf, and some are neither deaf nor blind? But what is the most important value in program? Who are the accessibility promotion agents? They are people with the content and experience to intervene whenever the right of communication and participation of persons with disabilities are being violated, and with the responsibility to find solutions to reverse the situation. Conceptually, the right of participation is always violated when there are no accessible communication resources so that people can communicate and be communicated. It applies to any face-to-face solution. For example, one of our agents is always called local public hospital to interpret sign language for deaf. But now I will call my friend of this project to talk about the today. Thank you very much.
Alan, está silenciado.
Oh, my bad. The APA project was interrupted by the pandemic. So in response to this, Escola de Gente discussed ways in which we could use this APA methodology in the digital world, but maintaining the sign language, audio description, easy language, and captioning as it was done face-to-face. Some of the data found in Survey TIC 2020 helped us take the decision to transpose the methodology onto our mobile app, Vem Cá, which launched in 2019. The data were, in Brazil, 99% of the population over 10 years of age uses the cell phone as the main means of accessing the internet, considering different social classes. Let that sink in. 58% of these users only access the internet through their phones, mainly among those belonging to lower social classes. The survey also revealed that Black people were the most frequent users who only access the internet through their phone. So we have been working to apply APA methodology into this first fully accessible mobile cultural app in Brazil. The app has more than 20,000 users and has just been recognized by the UN as one of the 400 SDGs best practices in the world. The Vem Cá app is also one of the winners of the Zero Project Award 2022, the same award that the APA methodology received in 2019. So uniting both of these will achieve three goals. One, in the pandemic, persons with disabilities started facing the worst exclusion in their histories when the flow of information abruptly migrated to a virtual world with no accessibility. The Vem Cá app and the APA project together will have more strength to counteract the effects of the pandemic. Two, it will be possible to disseminate the methodology to all the Brazilian territory and other countries, increasing its social impact. And 3, Escola Gente will advance even further in what has been its motto since 2020. We work so that the greatest legacy of the pandemic is a democratic, inclusive, and free digital world. I know we're pretty much at the time already, but there's only one more paragraph, I promise. And perhaps one of the most important ones. Inclusion is a systemic and non-polarized process of finding solutions to new and old social dilemmas. We are inevitably a single system. When we lose this notion, we also lose the capacity to believe and work towards an inclusive world. Thank you very much, and that's us.
Muchísimas gracias, Claudia y Alan, por compartir su experiencia sin duda tan interesante. Si alguno quiere algo más material sobre esta experiencia, en el chat estamos dejando más información. Bueno, este es el momento de compartir algunas preguntas y dudas que se presentaron en el chat. Hay una pregunta especialmente interesante que realiza Albertino Delado, que se pregunta: ¿educación inclusiva o educación especial? Los países con recursos limitados, como Cabo Verde, optan por educación inclusiva, pero existen muchos problemas: legislación, barreras arquitectónicas y accesibilidad, entre otros. Si es así, ¿no sería mejor optar por la educación especial? No sé si hay algún expositor en particular que quiera responder esta pregunta, que quiera hacer algún comentario al respecto. Sobre esta duda que surge no solamente en esta pregunta, sino en muchas personas todavía en la sociedad, de cuál es la ventaja de la educación inclusiva por sobre la educación especial en contextos en donde todavía existen muchas dificultades. Gordon, no sé si quieres responder.
Sure, I'll speak to it briefly. One of the things that I think is often overlooked is that by pursuing inclusion in our schools, we're challenging teachers to acquire and develop new skills in how to accommodate learners they maybe typically don't serve. But when they do that, every time you work to develop new skills, new ways of teaching, new pedagogical approaches, it supports the teacher to be more effective with all the other children in the class. And if you can contrast that to what happens if children who have, quote, differences are handled in segregated special education, special classes, or special schools, let's think about how that works. A teacher has students, and any student who has a challenge in learning is identified and sent off somewhere else, and the teacher just teaches the children who are left. So the result of that is that it's telling teachers there's a limited scope to your professional practice. You can teach some children, but not children who are who might present more challenges. And when you invest in that kind of system, you're actually spending money that you could be spending to strengthen regular education in typical schools. So what seclusion, what segregation, what traditional special education does is it undermines the confidence that teachers in regular schools can serve the students who would naturally go there. And that's why the whole idea of strengthening inclusion, which means strengthening inclusive practices, is a way to really strengthen the school. And I would argue that every time a school sends, and we're talking here about public education that is paid for by the people of the country, but when every time you take a student out of typical regular education and send them somewhere special, we have to understand that you're sending money, resources with them. In most places that I know about, certainly including here in my own country, there's not an unlimited amount of money available to support education. So you have so much money, and it's how you use it that's in question. And every time you send one student, two students, three students out of the class to go somewhere else, you have to create and pay for an alternative that withdraws resources from the regular school. So I think we really need to tune into this fact that inclusion means that we take the resources we have and push them into the regular school and enhance and strengthen what's there already, rather than withdraw resources, withdraw students, and diminish the confidence that we have that teachers can indeed teach all of our children.
Perfecto. Muchísimas gracias, Gordon, por esta explicación y esta aclaración. Realmente todas las exposiciones han sido muy valiosas y muy ricas desde diversos lugares del mundo, que dejan en claro que sin duda, a pesar de que todavía quedan muchas dificultades y muchas deudas pendientes para garantizar sistemas educativos plenamente inclusivos, que puedan recibir a todos los alumnos, a todas las personas, la transformación para avanzar en la inclusión es posible. Estamos convencidos de que es posible, y hay muchas personas en todo el mundo que estamos trabajando para ello. Y sin duda, la transformación de los sistemas educativos es positiva, no solamente para los estudiantes con discapacidad, sino para todos los alumnos, para los docentes, para las familias, para la sociedad en general, porque sin duda el primer paso para construir sociedades verdaderamente justas, verdaderamente inclusivas, plurales, que valoren la diversidad humana, es la educación. Así que quiero agradecerles especialmente a todos los expositores por su trabajo, el trabajo que realizan todos los días, y queremos alentarlos desde la Red para la Educación Inclusiva de Latinoamérica, desde la campaña mundial por la educación y la campaña latinoamericana por el derecho a la educación, a seguir trabajando en este sentido, y quedamos a disposición nuestras organizaciones para acompañar material, para proveer capacitaciones y para todo lo que necesiten para poder avanzar en este camino de la inclusión, que sin duda es el verdadero camino para garantizar una educación para todos. Muchísimas gracias a todos, muchísimas gracias a todos los participantes por estar hoy acá. Con esto nos despedimos y este evento va a quedar grabado y a disposición de nuevamente de todos los que quieran acceder. Muchísimas gracias.